Hey guys, so even though I'm not there today, I wanted you guys to get these notes in some way, so this is how we're doing it today. So yesterday we started talking about World War I. We talked about the causes: mania, militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? And all of these causes coming together have pulled most of Europe into a world war for the first time ever, right? We're killing people like we've never killed people before. And even though all of Europe is tied up in this, America at this point is still very isolated, right? Besides that tiny little phase we went through in the imperialism era, where everyone was imperializing everything, besides that, America, for the most part, has been a very isolated country. And we kind of like to mind our own business. Besides the imperialism era, we were in everybody's business then. But besides that, we've been a very isolated country, and we really are not trying to get involved in the Second World War. Woodrow Wilson knows that his country is made up of a lot of different people. It is called a melting pot, right? There's large proportions of allies in our country, and there's a large proportion of the Central Powers, right? So there's lots of Germans and Irishmen and Italians and all these people that are comprising the alliances that are going on over there in Europe. And Woodrow Wilson doesn't want to pick one side or the other just out of the blue without any reasoning, because it's going to alienate about half of his country. So knowing this, Woodrow Wilson's going to campaign for his re-election on the platform of keeping us out of war. You see here a picture of one of his campaign pins, right? War in Europe, peace in America. Right, God bless Woodrow Wilson. He's doing a great job keeping us free. Unfortunately, that can only go on for so long, and some events are going to occur that are out of his control, that are going to force him to pick a side. So here we see an image. Down here we see a submarine. You can tell it's a submarine because it's under this water line, and there's this little stream that signifies a torpedo, and this gigantic ship that's been struck is going down, right? That ship is called the Lusitania. And more on that in just a second, right? Lusitania is going to be one of the factors that brings us closer to war. So the Germans, one of the leading members of the Central Powers, are going to begin something called unrestricted submarine warfare. And that's a really important phrase that you need to absolutely 100% know. So if you want to put that in your notes, and make sure you underline and put a star next to it. Unrestricted submarine warfare. What does that mean? That means that Germany is using its fancy new submarines, their U-boats, right, underwater boats, to rampage around the Atlantic. And they're not just sinking ships, but they're not following the rules of the ocean, right? They have things, what are they called? Anyway, rules in the ocean, and part of it is you have to warn a vessel before you sink it. That way people have the ability to, flee the ship, to get on lifeboats and, paddle away before the entire ship goes down. And that's just for warships. When it comes to merchant ships, ships that are selling things, passenger ships, we're not going to be allowing people to sink those, because those are just civilians, right? Usually we try to avoid civilian casualties, but Germany decides that it's just going to start targeting everybody, and it just starts torpedoing all the ships it comes into contact with. Now, it's important to understand that the Lusitania, yes, it was sunk by the Germans. Yes, there were Americans on board, but it was not actually an American ship. The Lusitania was an English ship that was actually sailing across the Atlantic, and Germany and England had both warned Americans, do not sail in the Atlantic Ocean. You will probably die. Oh my god, my dog. Okay, sorry about that. Elvis was barking like an idiot. But anyway, back to this. The Lusitania was sunk, Americans die, Germany's not following the rules, and it's beginning to affect America, right? So previously, Woodrow Wilson could sit back and say, hey, this is not our war, right? But all of a sudden, Germany has caused American deaths. So now it's kind of easier to point at Germany as being the bad guys. And Woodrow Wilson says, hey, Germany, that really wasn't cool. We're not part of this. You need to apologize. You literally killed a bunch of Americans. And Germany's like, ooh, my bad. Won't do it again. But they do. And shortly after, Germany's going to torpedo a French ship. Notice these are not American ships that they're torpedoing. They're the people in the actual war, England and France. But they're not following the rules of the sea, and they're using unrestricted submarine warfare, which Woodrow Wilson doesn't like. And what he basically says to Germany is, if you do not, 1, apologize, and 2, decide to no longer use unrestricted submarine warfare, America will get involved in the war. Promise you won't use unrestricted warfare, and we will stay out. Germany says, okay, thank you. We do not want America to get involved. We will gladly promise to not use unrestricted submarine warfare. So the Sussex Pledge is a promise between Germany and America for Germany to no longer target ships. Right? We need to not use unrestricted submarine warfare. We need to use restricted submarine warfare. We need to warn ships that we are about to kill them, hopefully to prevent the deaths of any other Americans, right? So with the Sussex Pledge, unrestricted submarine warfare, the threat of that is kind of alleviated, and Woodrow Wilson says, okay, fine, we're not going to get into it. We're continuing to stay neutral, and Germany says, thank goodness. They really don't want America to get involved. Which moves us to our second and more immediate cause, right? The Zimmermann Telegraph. Now, if you look at some of these words actually transcribed from the actual telegraph itself, it says, this is a telegraph sent from Germany, right, to Mexico. It says, we intend to begin on the 1st of February unrestricted submarine warfare. What? They promised us they would stop that. Then they say, we shall endeavor in spite of this to keep the United States of America neutral. In the event of this not succeeding, which it won't, we will make Mexico a proposal of alliance on the following basis. Okay, so Germany's asking Mexico to become their ally. And they say, what will happen if this happens? Make war together, make peace together. Okay, so fight together and win. Generous financial support and an understanding of our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. This is Germany proposing that Mexico team up with them against us. Right? Now that sounds kind of crazy, but remember, when we were talking about Pancho Villa and all the issues we're having with Mexico and Latin America, tensions are a lot higher between these two countries, right? So the possibility that they could actually decide to do this is there. This is not some far-fetched idea, right? Germany has put a lot of thought into this, and they've decided that it's worth the gamble. Unfortunately for Germany, America finds out about this. We intercept the telegram going from Germany to Mexico. We translate it, and we find out that Germany is, really, really two-faced. Not only are they trying to get Mexico to team up against us, but they've also revealed in the telegram that they're planning to resume unrestricted submarine warfare, which is the very thing they just promised that they would stop doing. So with this, Woodrow Wilson can no longer ignore this. In the same way that the De Lome letter encouraged most Americans to get on board with the war, the Zimmermann Telegraph is going to do that for World War I. And with that, Woodrow Wilson's not going to be able to ignore that. Remember that he's on the moral diplomacy, the idea that diplomacy should be safe for all, right? At this point, we don't feel that our diplomacy is very safe, that it's being very well guarded, and he decides to ask Congress to go to war, and Congress says yes. April 1917, America is going to join World War I on the Allied side against Germany. Now, it's important to understand that Germany understood the risk. It was a calculated risk for them to send this Zimmermann Telegraph, for them to decide to resume unrestricted submarine warfare, which we had promised that if they continued to do, we would join. Germany kind of called their bluff a little bit, and they knew we would join the war, but what they thought was that it would take us a really, really long time to mobilize. What does that mean? They thought it was going to take us too long to get all of our troops together, to get all our supplies together, to ship all these required implements over to Europe, right? We're a big country. We haven't really fought on a war this scale quite yet. So they're kind of looking at us as rookies at this point, and we're far away. So Germany believes that they'll be able to win the war in Europe before we're able to get all our ducks in the row and actually get to Europe. Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for us, and the winning side of the war, this is not true. America's been shipping supplies over to Europe for a very long time, so the whole mobilizing thing really doesn't take that long. And when we decide to enter the war, we'll be able to get there quickly. So, on a quiz or a test, if I ask you for the causes of the United States entering World War I, there are two causes, right? While the Lusitania and the Sussex Pledge bring us closer to war, the better, verbiage for that cause is going to be unrestricted submarine warfare, right? That's the problem that we really have with how Germany's fighting this war. We don't like the fact that they're taking advantage of civilians, and it's starting to affect us, right? Americans are dying because of the Germans, the unrestricted submarine warfare. The second major cause is the Zimmermann Telegraph. That basically, that burn letter written from Germany sent to Mexico. After that, it's impossible to ignore Germany, and we're forced to enter. Americans are going to quickly mobilize, despite Germany's predictions, and nearly 3 million Americans are going to be drafted and sent over to Europe. American troops in World War I are called doughboys. And there's a couple different theories on why that is. Mostly because most of our troops had seen action in some of the more southern states. And when you're walking around in those southern states, all that sand and clay is going to get kicked up. And you end up looking like you've walked through a bunch of flour. Right? So you look like bakers, you look like doughboys. But anyway, when the Americans show up, the Europeans have been fighting this war for years at this point, right? And they've been in these trenches for years, in these deadlocked areas with no major land gains. Americans show up and we're feeling froggy. We've got fresh legs. So we bring in this higher morale that the Europeans have not had, and we're instantly able to turn the tide of the war. We're instantly able to get some traction going on the Western Front, mostly, and that coupled with the Soviets on the other side, we're going to be able to quickly end the war. The Americans are going to be able to help the Europeans win on the Western Front. Japan's going to jump in for the last couple weeks, and Italy's actually going to switch sides. We'll talk more about that whenever I see you guys next. But cool. Okay, last thing I want to leave you guys with is this guy. This guy's name is Frank Buckles. You may or may not have heard of him before. Frank Buckles is famous for being the last surviving World War I veteran, which means that he was the last person in the entire world, not just the United States, but in the entire world, he is an American, that had fought in the war. He was born in 1901 and he died in 2011. He died at 110 years old. He was the second oldest American in the world at his death. But why am I talking to you about this random dude, Frank Buckles, who was, 17 when he joined the war, went over and fought? Well, first of all, I bet you never thought that you were alive at the same time that someone who fought in World War I was. We're not talking about like World War II with Hitler. We're not talking about that. We're talking about World War I, right? Over 100 years ago, we're talking about. But it happened, right? We were alive at the same time as this person. Now, why am I telling you that? This is important to understand, right? We're talking about the early 1900s. That's a long, long time ago. But it's important to keep in mind that even though that sounds like a really, really long time ago, it was, but when you put it into perspective, like, these people are people just like us. They're no different. They have, the same feelings and stuff.